Am I okay here? Tony, standing here? Am I okay standing here? Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to go through a brief presentation about the Webquay Supply Road project. This is what we call Public Information Center number 2, or PIC number 2. We're going to talk a bit about where we are in the project, remind people about the project, and then where we're going with the project as well. So we'll just walk you through that. And just to remind people, excuse me for one sec here. Let's see from the beginning. Tony, 1 second here. Why is this not changing? Why is it not changing? There must be other ones open here. Just, yes, this one. There we go. Good. Okay, so just to remind everyone where we are in terms of the project, it's located in northwestern Ontario. Webquay is about 250 kilometers from both Hudson Bay and James Bay. And the road itself is about 107 kilometers long. I'll get into the details of the road shortly. And you're looking at, we're probably about 600 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay. What? Oh, okay, thanks. So there are two other road projects, all-season road projects in the area that you've probably heard of. The Webquay Supply Road is the northernmost road. The next road moving south is the Northern Road Link Road, which runs from the eastern end of the Webquay Supply Road down to just west of Martin Falls. And then the Martin Falls Community Access Road runs from just west of Martin Falls south, connecting with existing resource roads, which then ultimately connect with the provincial road network. So the three main purposes of the Webquay Supply Road, again, this project has been initiated by Webquay First Nation, and the three main purposes are to move materials, supplies, and people from the airport to the McFalls Lake area to allow the community to participate in any exploration and mine development activities that occur there. The idea would be it could provide local employment and economic development opportunities to community members in Webquay while allowing them to still remain living in their communities. And then finally, to provide experience and training opportunities for youth and help encourage them to pursue additional skills through higher education or post-secondary education. So this is what we call consultation round 2. We are now about 6 years into this environmental assessment, impact assessment process. There are 22 Indigenous communities that we consult with as part of this environmental and impact assessment. We have met with most of these communities and provided different types of engagement or consultation options to these communities, including in-person meetings, drop-in sessions, radio shows on, for example, community radio stations or the Wabate Radio Network, and then the teleconferences as well. So we've also done virtual community meetings through Zoom-like technology on scheduled dates where communities were given a couple of weeks advance notice to join these as well. And then we've promoted these events via social media as well. So for this project, there were 3 primary alternatives that were very similar to each other. The community had done a significant amount of preliminary work to to discuss amongst themselves what the best route might be to go from the airport to McFalls Lake area. So we ended up having 3 alternatives that were quite similar, as I mentioned, and we evaluated those alternatives through a pretty comprehensive process. And from that process, we narrowed it down to one preferred route. And you can probably see here the purple line right in the middle here it's actually a 2-kilometer wide band or corridor. So it's a preferred corridor as opposed to an actual exact location for the road. So within that 2-kilometer band, the road would sit, and having a 2-kilometer wide corridor allows us to fine-tune the position of the road based on information that we get, especially information we get later on in the process, maybe where people or community members or it's identified that there are areas that are sensitive, and so there are adjustments made to the actual position of the road. So it's more than just a 2-lane gravel road. We have to get material to build the road with, aggregate or rock source areas. So we have to go through a process of identifying where those areas might be to help build the road. It's important that these areas be as close as possible to the road. It's preferred to minimize cost. And there are, of course, access roads to get to these facilities, such as the gravel pits and quarries. And these access roads, of course, have to cross water courses in many cases to get to those facilities. So that's sort of associated infrastructure. And then there are construction camps that are temporary, and storage and laydown areas as well that are positioned along the route to help with the construction. And then we have, on this map here, we go through a process of identifying where potential construction camps might be. So in this case, we have 4 general locations where they would be placed, and then we have 2 alternatives of each camp location. And so we go through a detailed evaluation, like we do with the road position. We go through a detailed evaluation, and this graph here shows the different colors represent different factors, such as living environment, physical environment, indigenous land use and interests, socioeconomic environment, and technical considerations. And then the higher, actually in this case, the higher the score, the more sensitive the particular area where the candidate camp is located. And so you can see here we have all 8 options. So there's 2 options for each camp location. And then we've identified which one is preferred, the one with the lower score. So what we do is we go through a process. It's sort of an overlay process where we take different layers of information. We overlay them, and there's a lot of different layers in this. And then we identify the areas that have the least impact based on the information that we've collected from our studies and existing information that we've collected as part of our work. So we've also done the same kind of thing. We've worked with, we've looked at some of the superficial or some of the geology maps in the area to identify potential aggregate source areas. We've done some additional drilling in some of these candidate areas to identify approximately how big these reserves of aggregate might be, and then what we do is we evaluate these areas to see based on how close they are to the planned route and how much they could supply the project, whether they could supply part of the project or all of the project, or the material could be used to maintain the road for its expected lifespan as well. So we go through, and you see this table here. There's a number of factors. We have different options on the left side going down, combinations of sites where there's aggregate, and and then we ask whether they meet the quantity requirements for the project, how able we are to access them, so how far are the access roads to get to these particular deposits, how close they are to the beginning of construction, because the plan is to begin construction in Webequie, whether they could serve as a long-term source or a temporary source of aggregates, and then we go through a scoring system to identify a preferred option for providing aggregates for like road building material for the project. So there's we've done preliminary engineering for this project, and there's two basic designs for the road. There's a design, and these are cross sections, so these are slices across the road. And there's one which is sort of the upland area cross section, where the construction is a little bit simpler. So you've got the road in a slightly higher elevation that drains quite well. It's easier, cheaper construction, and then you've got the construction of the road through the James Bay lowlands or the muskeg areas, which is more complicated and more expensive and requires more care and more design inputs and more expensive materials to build to allow the muskeg to function as it should and to allow the movement of water. So it involves the installation of more culverts, the use of a plastic sort of a matrix to help spread the load on the road so that the road behaves more in a more uniform way, so you don't get failures in the road. So there's two basic designs depending on where you are on the road. So about 40 to 50 or about 50 kilometers of this 107 kilometer road runs through muskeg, and so it requires that special kind of design. And then in terms of bridges, there's three major crossings that this road would make. The first one is the crossing of Winisk Lake, which would, so from the island where the actual settlement is in Webequie, across Winisk Lake, which is a span of about 200 to 250 meters. And the bridge that you see there is the type of bridge that would be built for that kind of a span. And then there are two other major water crossings. One, Winiscus's Channel, which is south of the Winisk Lake crossing. And then there's another one at the far eastern end of the Webequie Supply Road, which is the crossing of the Muckatai River, which is about 40 to 50 kilometers wide. And this image here shows the Winisk Lake crossing, as it is right now, before, and then what the bridge might look like based on the preliminary designs, just to give people a sense for what it would look like. So just to wrap up, in terms of the next steps, we are, like I said, in consultation round 2. We're taking feedback to finalize the evaluation of alternatives for supportive infrastructure. We're finalizing our baseline studies. We're writing our reports. Again, we're 6 years into this process. We're still collecting information from communities, taking input from communities and using that to shape our work. And through next year, this winter, and then through to the summer of next year, we'll be doing the environmental assessment report, the impact assessment study as well. And then that will ultimately be submitted to both the provincial government and the federal government. And they will ultimately make a decision. The minister will make a decision on what we've submitted, and then if they permit the project to proceed, then there's still many other hurdles that have to be sort of overcome in terms of permitting, and so we're still a ways away from this project actually being built, but we're probably about 3/4 of the way through the long process. So with that, I'll open it up for questions if people have questions. Yes.
How does this timeline work with the timelines for the other two roads?
So this project started first. So it's about maybe 6 months ahead of the Martin Falls Community Access Road, maybe in terms of the process, and it's about 2 years ahead, or a year and a half to 2 years ahead of the Northern Road Link process.
So the idea is that first, each road gets
Yes.
obviously
Yeah,
built
they were.
at a time.
I mean, a lot of people say, well, why did they just all be part of one big project? But they were all initiated for different reasons. There were different motivations, and so they started at different times. But this one would go first in theory. It would get if it is approved, it would likely be approved first, and construction would begin earlier on this from Webequay is the plan.
A couple more questions. When you say that you are evaluating various sensitivities, what would be an example of a sensitivity that would make you reconsider a route?
Oh, there's many different factors. It could be moose habitat, right? It could be things like moose breeding, like nursery areas. It could be certain plants that are important to community members, areas where these plants are known to be. We would typically avoid those areas. We collect Indigenous knowledge from community members, from communities that will sit down with us, and so they'll identify places, maybe burial sites or other areas that are of importance to them, and so we make sure we avoid those areas. So we take all of these different layers. There are certain landforms that maybe that aren't preferred for construction, right? Just we try to avoid them. But there's literally, I would say, I don't even know how many layers there might be, but probably 50 to 60 different layers that are factored into this process that we go through. To help us evaluate areas and the impact on certain areas, and so it's a constant process where we go back to communities, and then we show them the routes, and then we get further feedback about these areas to see if is there anything we're missing here? Are there any things that we're not considering in this? And as I was saying before, the nice thing is having a corridor. It gives us room to make sort of micro level adjustments to the position of the road as well.
Okay. Sorry, just one more follow-up question. What would be an example of a landform that would not be conducive?
Okay. I mean, we try to avoid. I mean, muskeg is a landform that it can't be avoided, but you can minimize the path. The amount of muskeg that the road could travel through, right? So we try to minimize the number of water crossings by when we route the road, because of course, we're trying to do the least amount of disturbance as possible. So we would try to keep the spans of the bridges as narrow as possible, and the number of crossings as few as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Oh, Tony?
Okay. What would be your projected cost of the development of that 100 and change?
So, we don't have like a final estimated cost, but you're probably looking for a road of this length. It's somewhere in the range of $300 to $500 million to build.
And who would foot the bill for that?
That isn't determined yet. I mean, it would likely be. It would be probably a combination of federal and provincial funding, but I can't confirm that yet. The other question that we often get is who would own the road, and who would manage the road, and so ownership and sort of that has not yet been answered. I mean, it would be built to MTO specifications. But yeah, some of these things are still to be determined. But that's sort of where we're looking at in terms of cost for this road.
So have all the communities been approached?
Yes.
All the communities?
Yes.
Both the Mattawa and the Muskegowag Council?
Yes.
communities?
Yeah. So there's 22 communities, as I mentioned, that include both Mushkegowuk and Mattawa communities as well. So we haven't necessarily been to every community. We've tried to visit every community. We've tried to communicate with every community, and we're still doing that. And we're, as you saw, we try multiple types of approaches to work with communities, whether, whatever is most convenient for them. I mean, we've been up to Sheshawan recently, and so we've been, we do our best. We do our best to talk to as many communities as we can.
Thank you.
Just in regards to the communities, 22 communities you said. So at the end of the day, I'm not sure if I missed it in your presentation, but which communities would have to provide the ultimate support for this project to move forward, given all the conditions are positive to move forward?
That's a great question. Which communities? All of them are consulted. All the communities are consulted. We take the comments that we've received, and we've received. I was telling one individual who was here earlier that when we went through the terms of reference process, the provincial process, where basically we come up with a plan for how we're going to do the environmental assessment, and then the provincial government and the public look at it and provide comments. So we've addressed probably, well, for sure over 1,000 comments. Each one, we've addressed these comments individually and responded to them. So I can't really give you an answer in terms of like which specific communities we'd have to get support from. It really comes down to the ministry being satisfied that we've conducted our duty to consult, and that we've comprehensively assessed whether the impacts of the project and whether they're mitigatable, and then the province and the federal government have to make their decision based on everything we present to them.
Okay, would you say that it's a cooperative approach, government and community, though? I'm just trying to get a sense of.
The decision is made by the province and the federal government. It's cooperative in the sense, I suppose, that they've asked for input from the communities, and the communities have had opportunity to provide that input. So that's the cooperation, I think. It's probably better answered by the regulators, the provincial, like MECP and IAC. I would. It's more a question for them, I would say. But in terms of the process, we work with the communities, we work with the general public and special interest groups to collect that information as we're directed to, and we try to respond to it and use that information to shape our assessment, and then the regulators take it from there.
Okay, just one last one. So would you say that the affected communities, or the communities that will benefit by the road being in place, they are in support?
So I guess you could say that. I mean, Webakwe, their motivation for doing this is for economic development purposes. So they're actually the initiator of the environmental assessment. So this is their project. We work for them.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't. Well, your previous answer, that didn't really come across as clear as what you just said. So okay.
Okay. Yeah. So we work for Webakwe First Nation, and then the Northern Road Link project. It's Webakwe First Nation and Martin Falls that are what you call the proponents of the environmental assessment and impact assessment. And then the Martin Falls Community Access Road, Martin Falls is the proponent of that one, yeah.
You mentioned that you have federal and provincial approvals at the end of this process. Are there significant differences in what these two government bodies expect that could actually stop the project?
There are differences in how they approach this. So, we need the approval of both for the project to proceed. I guess in terms of the differences, the main difference, I guess, is in the provincial process. We, as the technical people, the proponent technical people, develop the work plan, the proposed work plan, and then we give it to the province for them to comment on and the public to comment on. But in the federal process, what we do is we come up with a very detailed description of the project, which they then take and then they go and they basically come up with our work plan. And they tell us what they expect from us when we do the impact assessment. Now, it's all in one document. So we produce one document that has to satisfy both levels of government. So that's how the process works. So you could have a situation definitely where the province might approve it and the federal government might not approve it.
But I assume that during this process, they've got their representatives fully involved. And it should be literally a rubber stamp at the end of it.
Oh, it's definitely not a rubber stamp. I mean, they guide us in terms of what they expect from us. And then so we do our best to keep communicating with them through the process and try to, collect the information that they're asking us to collect. And then we prepare our assessment of potential impacts and our assessment of how those impacts can be mitigated or limited, and then we give it to them, and then they make that decision in the end. It's their decision alone, essentially.
You mentioned the potential cost of the road. What's the budget for the study?
So the initial study, the budget, I would say, is probably, I would say somewhere in the range of $10 to $15 million for the environmental assessment, the impact assessment. And again, it changes, right? Because all of a sudden we can get the regulators can come to us and say, well, we need you to do more studies on this, and then that may cause, that typically does cause the budget to go up. And that's happened to us before, right? Where they say, we want this, but then as we go through the process, they say, well, we want this as well, right? And then we have to do more studies. We've run into that in a few cases.
Okay, so once let's say it's approved, how long will it take to build?
Oh, great question. The time frames I've seen is a minimum of 3 years, anywhere from 3 to 5 years to build, I would say. How long would it take to build? Yeah. Yeah, so the 3 to 5 years that's the range that we've seen.
Does that include infrastructure? Like you're going to need security, a camp, like there's people building it, right? So
Yep, that would include.
to hand over to whoever the operator
Yeah, that's basically the range that we've been given. I think it, to be honest with you, it's probably more closer to 5, based on what I know. Yeah, because remember, there's the permitting associated with getting the environmental assessment or the impact assessment approved. But then, there's more permitting after that, right? There's a lot more. There's like literally 100 plus permits after that, which require additional work, right, in order for the permit to be granted. So it's not like I know I've heard before people thinking that once you've got you've got the permission through the approved environmental assessment or impact assessment, you can just go ahead and no, there's so much other work after that in terms of the permitting for building a bridge, right? You're doing a water crossing, so you have to make sure, you have to come up with an environmental management plan to make sure that you have a plan in place during construction and during operations too, right? So if things happen, you have to have a monitoring plan in place too, and functioning and all, so that there's a lot of planning involved in it, even before you put the first shovel in the ground. So I would say it's probably closer to 5 years, realistically.
So your scope is literally just for the environmental phase to get it to finish
That's right.
construction?
We're
And then you hand it over for somebody to.
it would so yeah exactly so. So our role is preliminary engineering and the environmental and impact assessment. And then, so what would happen after that is there would be, it moves into what you call a detailed design stage, where they do more detailed work to identify the specific details of the road, right? Like we know generally, like I've shown you generally how it would be built, but then once you know exactly where it's going to be, you've got to do a detailed design so that you can then issue what you call a tender for construction, right? So basically you're going out to construction companies and saying, okay, here's a project, here's all the details, give us a price and build it. And so it might be design and build, or it might be just construction, but that's typically the process, right? It goes from, once our work is done, it would move to detailed design and then construction after that.
Why wasn't it called Ring of Fire Supply Road versus Quebec? Because the main reason for this is to access the mine deposits, isn't it?
I don't know why they. I mean, the community views it as their road, right? As their road to help them. So that's probably that's probably why. Yeah.
I'm just curious, how many, is it pretty, is it the same every mile for every feet of muskeg? Is it the same consistent the whole way?
No, it's not. That's a great question. Different, muskeg has in terms of construction, and we've done these surveys where it's called ground penetrating radar, where in the winter it's basically a snow machine pulling a sled behind it that sends radar signals down through the ground, and it measures the thickness of the peat layer. So the thicker the peat layer is, basically the better the design has to be to make sure that the road can withstand the weight, right? So even within the muskeg, you would build the road differently in certain areas. If the peat is, for example, over 1 meter thick, then you would build it to a certain standard. So it does change the design, because I think the peat does get as thick as 4 meters in certain spots. We know now, where those areas are. So when they get into detailed design, you'll see a different kind of design, a slightly different kind of design in those areas to compensate for the fact that you've got this sort of 4 meters of like squishy material underneath.
Is that all done on like surveillance, or is there somebody going actually in the field?
Oh yeah, it's we basically hired a subcontractor to go out in the winter on a snow machine with community members out there helping us as well. They were doing a lot of the work with us and towing this sled behind with the device on top of it, and then we get a profile of how thick the peat is through there. It was, I don't know, maybe a couple of meters. There were areas where it was 4, and that was the most. The least was, under a meter, like 30 centimeters or something. But it's not like super thick all the way through. It's quite variable, but still, it's still muskeg, right? It's just different degrees. No. No. So typically for these kinds of designs, to make sure you don't get the water backing up on one side, because muskeg has the water there moves very, very slowly, right? You don't think it's moving because you don't see it moving, but it actually is moving. So what they do is they put in more culverts, for example, to allow the flow equalization, so you don't get a buildup of water on one side, and so you put in more of these culverts in areas where you need to make sure that water flow continues, so it behaves like it did before. And there's other examples, for example, in Manitoba, in northern Manitoba, where they've built these kinds of roads. One of our consultants worked on that project, and they've been doing monitoring of these roads since they've been built, which was over 10 years ago, to see how the road is behaving structurally, right? To see how it's holding up, and then looking at groundwater levels on one side versus the other, they built these roads in a fashion similar to the way we would build them, and they're not seeing anything. They're seeing that the flows are equal on either side, which is great. But when it gets to the detailed design level, whoever does the detailed design will be looking at the best examples out there, best management practices for building the road in those areas.
Mine's kind of related to the road. I mean, you're talking a lot about the squishiness and trying not to sink, probably, obviously. But what about the recent sensitivities that's connected with peatlands and the carbon sink, and trying not to disturb that, so that you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere? Like, has that been, I would assume, obviously taken into consideration as well? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. I mean, so years ago, what they would do is they would excavate the peat, right? They would just remove it, and you don't want to be doing that. So the idea is we would build on top of it, right? So it's more expensive, but it's that way you don't have the degree of impact that you're talking about there. You're not removing the peat. The peat is still in place. It's being compressed, obviously, by the weight of what's on top of it, but you're not excavating it.
It's still there, though. I wouldn't say it's totally.
Yeah, yeah.
You started talking a little bit about this, but I'm just wondering, sorry, I've forgotten the name of your company now.
Atkins Realis.
Atkins
Yep.
Realis. So other projects that you've done that are similar to this, and how they panned out.
So in terms of our company, I mean, there's subcontractors that we work with that have experience building in these areas. In northern Manitoba in particular, like I was saying, is it East Side Lake Winnipeg? Those in that area, there's a large network of roads that were built up there. So those are some of the examples that we look to. Again, we're doing preliminary design, so for areas like Muskeg, which is, we would lean on other people, and we have been, that are experts in building in those areas. We also, just to add, we also do studies, and we've done some modeling. I don't know all the details of it offhand because it's just been finished, I think, but we've done some modeling of building through the muskeg as well too. So, it's something that we're really mindful of, because it's a fair comment, right? It's an area, it's a very sensitive area, and we need to make sure that if we're going to build a road through there, that we, mitigate impacts as much as we can.
And in your experience, who winds up paying for the maintenance of a road, like going through this kind of geography?
Well, there could be a whole bunch of different models, right? There could be different models for the construction. It might be, there's a lot of different models, ownership models that involve maintenance of the road later on. It could be one or a number of First Nations could be involved in that, right? And have jurisdiction over the road or some level of control over the road, and then maintenance responsibilities for it. It's too hard for me to say. There's a lot of different options that are out there. I think that discussion's just starting now. So, there's you see these public-private partnerships. These P3, they call them P3 projects. That's one model, but there's many other models now that are perhaps better than that could be utilized for this as well too. So, I mean, the part of this project is to help benefit the community and the communities in the region, right, through employment and opportunities and maybe revenue sharing from use of the road. So that could all get factored into this. The ownership model for the road as well too. Okay. Anyone else? No, got one. Sorry. It's not a mine. No, all this is a road. It's an all-season road. I don't want to comment on I'm not the mining company. You're better off talking to Ring of Fire Metals about that. I don't know enough about what they're doing. This is just a 2-lane gravel road, all-season road that goes to where those mines are planned to be. That's the best I can do with that. So it's gravel. Like the biggest deposits that we've found actually sit within the Webekwe First Nation reserve, both in and just outside of it. So it's from what I understand, it's gravel that could be used directly, for its appropriate size and everything for the project, which is fantastic because there isn't a lot of rock around there, right? As you know, there's a few rock outcrops in the muskeg, but when you get a little bit north and west of there actually are some pockets where there's enough material to build the road.
So, sorry, Ashley, last question then about how much muskeg. So to have those aggregate esker pits, whatever you want to call them, in those 4 areas you described earlier, if it's all muskeg where you're not bringing it in, then is there going to be some scaling off the muskeg to access that country rock, or is it being brought in? Like,
no, the rock is outside of the muskeg areas. It's to the west and north. Yeah. And what we call the upland areas, which it's still not really that upland. It's still pretty low anyway.
Still like a heave
it's still
of some
pretty low,
sort,
yeah.
it's exposed.
Yeah, so just sort of at the west end of where the muskeg is of the James Bay lowlands, there's a number of deposits there that we could use for the road to build the road and to maintain the road. And they're big, right?
Maintain. Okay, so how long are you talking about maintain?
So this road is designed, I mean, the lifespan of the road and most of these kinds of roads is 75 years. So that's sort of that's what we use as our sort of planning time frame for maintenance of the road.
That's say that's good payback?
Yeah.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Anything else? Anyone else? Okay, if you think of any other questions, don't hesitate to ask me. Thanks to everyone for coming tonight. It's great. We had a good turnout.